The shocking truth behind Chevy's Deadly 302 Turbo Fire Engine. Let's rewind the clock. The year, 1967. America was buzzing with flower crowns, peace signs, and protest songs, but deep inside a locked GM facility, far away from the love-ins and folk guitars, a handful of rebellious engineers were plotting something very different. They weren't protesting the war. They were launching one, against the rules, against the corporate playbook, and frankly, against reason. And what they built wasn't a peace offering. It was a 302 cubic inch scream machine that redlined like it was late for the apocalypse. This thing wasn't supposed to exist. GM tried to hide it, but they couldn't kill the legend. And lately, a lot of you have asked for this story, the real story, behind Chevy's most dangerous engine. So here it is. Buckle up, hit that like button if you're ready to go deep. And don't forget to subscribe and comment below. Because this isn't just an engine, it is the outlaw that made the rules bleed. What they built was 5 liters of pure defiance. Squeezed into a block so compact, you'd think it belonged in a sewing machine. It wasn't made for hauling groceries or taking the kids to school. No, it had one purpose: obliterate the competition while slipping under the radar of GM's tight-lipped execs. This wasn't just an engine, it was industrial espionage in a cast-iron suit. Most engines of the day wheezed at 5,500 RPM. This one, that's when it cleared its throat. It screamed right past 7,000 like it was trying to rip its own guts out, and enjoyed it. Back then, Detroit was a war zone. Ford, Chrysler, GM, they weren't playing nice. Horsepower was the weapon, and there were no rules, only victors. But the real battlefield, that was the Trans Am series. One strict rule: engines couldn't exceed 305 cubic inches. Ford already had their 302, Chevy's smallest small block, a 327. That wouldn't cut it. And so, in the shadows, the conspiracy began to take shape. A kind of Chevy exec who hated red tape more than blown head gaskets. He wasn't just a manager, he was a quiet revolutionary in loafers, known for slipping race engines past legal departments like contraband. Alongside him was Dick Kenneth, a camshaft whisperer with the instincts of a safecracker. And then there was Zora Arkus Duntov, not just the godfather of the Corvette, but the sort of man who would race you at midnight, beat you at dawn, and sketch a better valve train while sipping his coffee. Legend has it, Zora once slapped experimental parts into a test car without approval. And when GM brass caught wind, he nearly lost his job. But instead of firing him, they promoted him. Why? Because the car ran faster than anything else in the fleet. These weren't employees. They were renegades. In one interview, GM probably burned in a boardroom fireplace. Piggins said, "We didn't ask for permission. We built it to win." That should tell you everything. They quietly assembled the engine at GM's Tonawanda plant in New York, cobbling parts from the 327 and the 283. Since corporate banned engines under 5.0 liters in production cars, the team worked at night, labeled everything experimental, and prayed no one looked too close. They took the 4-inch bore from the 327, mated it to the short 3-inch stroke from the 283. The result? Exactly 302 cubic inches, just enough to slip under Trans Am rules. But this wasn't some lazy Frankenstein job. This was surgical engineering done by flashlight and fueled by spite. While the rest of GM was off selling family cars and flexing big blocks, the outlaws in the back room had just built a shrieking, high-revving monster and dropped it straight into the Z28 Camaro. For 3 short years, from 1967 to 1969, the 302 was technically legal, but spiritually, It was an underground weapon disguised as a showroom option. It wasn't made for profit. It wasn't made for comfort. It was made to race and to flip the bird to everyone in a suit. The spec sheet reads like a declassified military document: 4-inch bore, 3-inch stroke. That is a bore-to-stroke ratio of 1.33 to 1, practically heresy in Detroit. While most V8s of the era were coughing up their valves at 5,500 RPM, the 302 was just warming up. And don't believe that 290 horsepower rating on paper. That was a corporate fib. Real numbers, try 350, even 375 if you knew which bolts to loosen. What lay inside was no less rebellious. Forged steel crankshaft, forged pistons, solid lifter camshaft with 0.485-inch lift. Compression, 11 to 1. Poly R453 carb breathing fuel like a sniper loads rounds. And that exhaust, that wasn't a rumble. That was a war cry. Now, the engine earned nicknames like the Deuce for its 302 cubic inch displacement and the Screaming Mouse thanks to its banshee howl at full tilt. There's a rumor whispered in garages more than boardrooms that the aluminum intake manifold was reverse engineered from a seized Ford GT40 part captured at Le Mans. Whether it's true or not, the Chevy boys took a 302, stuffed it inside a Nova, and used it for hush-hush drag runs that left Ford's 427 Fairlanes wheezing in embarrassment. Mark Donohue said it wasn't an engine, it was a time bomb, and I loved lighting the fuse. Jerry Titus, white-knuckled at 7,000 RPM, put it this way: it felt like it wanted to rip the block apart. And here's what the suits really didn't want you to know. Every part was overbuilt intentionally, as if the engineers knew drivers would flog this thing far beyond spec. The intake, high-rise, oversized runners, and a weird plenum setup that traced back to Chevy's own experimental racing program. The double-hump cylinder heads with 2.02-inch intake valves, those weren't off the shelf. They were derived from racing designs tested at Daytona and Sebring. But the real smoking gun, the connecting rods, shot-peened, magnafluxed, identical in spec to the ones used in Chevy's L88 427 race engines. Components that had no business inside a so-called 290 horsepower production motor. They even added secret oil passages and reinforced bearing surfaces, stuff that wouldn't appear in regular GM blocks for years. But it didn't stop there. The juiciest bit was yet to come. Hidden in plain sight, the connecting rods. Not similar to the ones from the L88 427 race engines. Identical. Down to the millimeter. These weren't your run-of-the-mill components. They were shot, peened, magnafluxed, and built to endure forces way beyond what any so-called 290 horsepower engine should ever be capable of. Translation: on the outside, it wore the polite smile of a production motor. But inside, it was a street fighter in a three-piece suit. And just when you thought the subversion was over, the engineers had one last trick up their greasy sleeves. Secret oil passages, reinforced bearing surfaces, stuff that wouldn't show up in GM production engines for years. One of the best-kept secrets, Chevy once built a prototype 302-powered Corvette Stingray, a lightweight C3 mule with the little screamer under the hood. Word is, it was clocked in secret testing at Milford Proving Grounds, outrunning even the 427 cars in tight corners, thanks to its featherweight balance. But when news started to leak, execs ordered it crushed. No photos, no press. Just a whisper in the wind, and one retired test driver who swore that car could have embarrassed half the big blocks in the catalog. Now, in the pantheon of automotive rivalries, there is one showdown that stands above the rest: Ford's Boss 302 versus Chevy's 302. And the day the tide turned, that would be the 1968 Riverside race. Picture it. Mark Donohue behind the wheel of his Sunoco Blue Z28. Parnelli Jones barreling ahead in a Boss Mustang. Final lap. Donahue makes the move. Z28 slides past the Mustang, taking the win and rewriting history. Later, Roger Penske put it best in a recording that still gives Ford fans heartburn. They said we cheated. Nah, we just out-engineered them. And that was only the beginning. Riverside lit the fuse. Then came the domination. Laguna Seca, Watkins Glen. The Z28 kept stacking trophies like it was playing poker with loaded dice. But just when it looked like Chevy would own the podium forever, the curtain dropped. GM suddenly slashed Z28 production mid-season and shifted its spotlight to the more consumer-friendly Camaro SS. The official story: emissions changes, market realignment, blah, blah, blah. Anyone who's been around the block knew better. The 302's real crime: it was too damn good. See, the 302 committed the one sin no accountant could forgive. It made the moneymaker engines, the big blocks, look unnecessary. Why spend big money on a bulky 396 when a tuned 302 could outrun it, handle better, weigh less, and cost a fraction? It wasn't just fast. It was a threat to GM's entire business model. Somewhere deep in the GM vaults, buried behind dusty ledgers and forgotten memos, was a document warning of the Z28 problem. Their solution: quiet the rebellion, cut the supply, kill the buzz, pull the plug. By 1970, the 302 was gone, replaced by softer, cleaner, more politically correct engines that wouldn't ruffle corporate feathers. The most heartbreaking part, when racers, gearheads, even GM's own engineers begged the brass to keep the 302 alive, just for competition use, even in limited runs, all they got was silence. Stone walls and closed doors. The message couldn't be clearer. This revolution will not be horsepower rated. One leaked GM memo from 1969 said it plainly: Z28 threatens Corvette sales. Terminate the 302. That's it. That's all it took. Protect the golden goose, even if it meant killing the fighting rooster. But in true rebel fashion, some engineers weren't ready to go quietly. They smuggled blueprints to private racers, slipped specs to underground builders. Thanks to them, the 302 didn't die. It went underground, thriving in outlaw drag strips and backyard builds. Its DNA started showing up in unexpected places. That 1.33-to-1 bore-stroke ratio, nearly identical to what GM used later in the LS7. One engineer quietly admitted, every LS engine owes a debt to the 302's rebellion. And he wasn't exaggerating. The 302 had seen too much, done too much. And if it hadn't been muzzled, it might have changed everything. Its greatness wasn't something you measured on a dyno. You felt it in the rubber stripes it left across America's racetracks. In '68 and '69, that Camaro Z28, the one they called a test case, became a dynasty. Under Donahue and Penske, it dominated Trans Am like it had something to prove. In 1969 alone, the Z28 took 10 victories. It didn't just win, it demoralized. Pit crews from Ford, Dodge, AMC watched in stunned silence as that little small block screamed at 7,000 RPM, lap after lap, while their motors blew head gaskets, ate bearings, or just gave up entirely. What made it even more brutal? This wasn't David versus Goliath. This was Goliath versus Goliath. Ford brought its boss, 302. Dodge, its high-revving 340. AMC emptied the engineering vault. Everyone threw their best at the battlefield. And every single one got smoked by Chevy's screaming mouse. But the real reason folks tipped their hats to the 302, it wasn't just about lapping a racetrack. This thing was a Swiss Army knife in a land of sledgehammers. It could drag, road race, hill climb, and still be back home in time to idle in a parking lot like it hadn't just melted someone's quarter-mile dreams. It wasn't a one-trick pony. It was a mechanical shapeshifter, assuming, of course, you had the hands to hold the reins. And today, when gearheads talk about the Chevy 302, they're not just reminiscing about horsepower. They're remembering the sweet, forbidden taste of a purer era, before emissions tests, ad campaigns, and shareholder meetings drained the soul out of engineering. Original 302-powered Z28s. They're holy relics now. A clean one that'll set you back anywhere from 150 to 250 grand. And that's before you even mention the rare COPO builds or special order versions. But the value's not in the VIN plates. It's in the symbolism, in what it stood for. That howl at 7,000 RPM was the last war cry of an age where engineers still snuck through fences in the name of performance, before the EPA came knocking and Excel replaced drafting tables. And here's the kicker. GM tried to bury the 302, tried to erase it from the family album. But the thing they wanted to forget became the thing everyone wanted to find. Today, original parts, solid lifter cams, Holley R453 carbs, untouched aluminum manifolds, trade like ancient coins. A real NOS intake, 5 grand, for one part. There's now a full-blown forensic industry dedicated to verifying 302 builds. Experts using microscopes to scan casting marks, analyze metallurgy, and cross-check old Tonawanda records like detectives solving a cold case. Even after 50 years in the grave, the spirit of the 302 whispers through every high-performance Chevy on the road. It's the phantom inside the LS7. The reason a Corvette Z06 can spin 7,000 RPM without breaking a sweat. That bore stroke ratio, that razor-sharp throttle response, that didn't come from a boardroom. That came from a locked garage full of cigarette smoke and bad intentions. The 302 wasn't just an ancestor to the LS family. It was its godfather. And not just GM Ford's Coyote, modern Hemis. They all took notes. Light rotating mass, ideal geometry, heads that breathe like lungs at sea level. Every modern engine that chases redline like a drug is paying tribute to the screaming mouse. But perhaps the deepest legacy the 302 left us is the art of the noble lie. You see, GM rated it at 290 horsepower, on paper, to keep the regulators off their back. But anyone who's ever torn one down knows it was pushing 375 without breaking a sweat. That little game, underrating engines so drivers get a pleasant surprise when they open them up, that's standard practice now. But back then, the 302 wrote the playbook. Even now, in little machine shops and backstreet garages, there are rogue builders recreating the 302 in modern trim. Updated metallurgy, new machining, but the same old rules: high RPM, low mass, high compression, and no permission asked. These aren't replicas. They're reincarnations, souls in new shells. And every one of them carries the same message. We build for passion, not for profit. At its core, the Chevy 302 wasn't just an engine. It was proof of what happens when engineers are left alone to chase what they know is right. In just 3 short years, it kicked open the door to a different era, one where passion overpowered policy and wrenches beat spreadsheets. Every time a Z28 rolls into a vintage race or draws a crowd at a car show, you can still hear it whisper, "This could have been the future." What if GM hadn't killed it? What if the boardroom hadn't silenced the madmen in the basement? What if the 302 had been given the runway it deserved to rewrite muscle car history forever? We'll never know, because this wasn't an engine meant for brochures or board meetings. It was a secret weapon, born in shadows, unleashed on racetracks, and kept alive by the roar of its legend. No birth certificate, no shiny marketing campaign, just scorched asphalt, broken records, and the grins of drivers who knew they were piloting something forbidden. GM tried to erase it, but the 302 refused to die. And if you've ever redlined your motor just to see what lives on the other side, maybe, just maybe, a piece of that outlaw spirit lives in you too. If stories like this light a fire in your gut, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. And tell us in the comments, what's your favorite outlaw engine of all time? We're just getting warmed up.